We started talking about above the line and below the line voting.
Yep.
I guess explain it one, but then two, how is it working into the Green Party's strategy?
Okay, the system in Australia is that the majority of our parliaments are elected by single-member electorates with preferential voting. But in most states, the upper house and also federally the Senate is elected proportionally. And there's a couple of exceptions to this, but most of them use a system where there is a mix of what's called above and below the line voting. Now, if you vote below the line, you vote for the candidates you want, and you choose all the way through. If you vote above the line, you just put a 1, and the vote goes to the party, and the party then controls the vote, and they send it through their candidates in the order they wish, and then on to other parties in the order they wish. Now, it's a little bit more complex because different states use slightly different rules for their state elections. So I'll just describe the federal system, trying to get into the complexity of some of the states being different. Now, the problem with this is that in the Senate, if you want to vote below the line, you have to give a number to every candidate.
A ranking. A ranking
to every candidate, yeah. And given that in my state, Victoria, at the last election there were 65 candidates, so you had to go through from 165. You're allowed a few mistakes, but most people don't know that, so you're actually allowed 6 mistakes, but most people don't know that. So a lot of people go, well, if I go 165, I might make a mistake, I might put 261s in there or something like that, or they just can't be bothered. So most people vote above the line and just give their vote to the party. And that can be very damaging because in 2004, what happened was that the Labor Party had 2 people elected and they had a bit over half a quota left over. And the last position came down to a Green versus Family First, which is our right-wing Christian party. And the Labor Party gave their preferences to Family First ahead of the Green. And virtually nobody knew this. And so all these Labor voters went in voting Labor, thinking that Labor would have sent their preferences to the Greens, and then woke up and after the election and Family First got elected on the Labor preferences. And there were huge numbers of them, people resigning from the Labor Party over it, and huge numbers of people who were very, very angry. And it meant that the next time, some of those people voted Green because they didn't trust Labor, but in the meantime, we lost a senator that we would have had, and that Family First senator now has the balance of power in our Senate. So everything Labor wants, unless they can get the opposition to get through, they've got to get it through on his vote. And they've come to regret that decision quite a lot, I think. But nevertheless, it's he's there for 6 years, and so that part of the above the line voting, it's a very bad thing. There is pretty much universal agreement now that it's bad that having the above the line system is, or as it is bad. But the problem is that no one can agree on what to change it to. And so they're having an inquiry at the moment on looking for an alternative, and very few people, as I say, want to keep it exactly as it is, but there's so much disagreement on what alternative to adopt, so we don't know how that'll pan out.
And how does the Green Party strategy for above the line get decided inside the Green Party?
Okay, what happens there is that the general principles get decided by the State Council, which is the main body, other than the State Conference, which only happens once a year. The State Council, it happens about 6 times a year, and that's the governing body of the party. Now, and then they delegate a smaller team to make the more subtle decisions, because what happens is we've got to decide where we send those preferences, and if there's 65 candidates, we've got to rank them in order, and that's not easy, ranking all those 65. And what's more, there's a lot of horse trading that goes on, because you get people who say, we'll put you second if you put us second. And you say, well, no, we can't put you second because we want to go to these people second, but we'll put you third if you put us third. And there's a lot of very ugly horse trading. It's not a lot of fun. Sorry?
The parties decide.
So, well, this is in terms of the above the line, you see. So what we say to people is, we would prefer you to vote below the line. You make up your own mind, whatever. But we have to lodge an above the line thing, and the party has to decide on that. And there is one person who is designated as the person who has to sign off on the forms, and the Electoral Commission will only accept, and every party has to come in with that person has to lodge a form 2 weeks before the election saying, this is how things go from 165, and anyone who votes above the line, that's what they do. And so we've got to make that decision. So there's the small team that's got to make the decision, and the broad principles will be thrashed out. So the party might say to people, okay, we want you to go to Progressive Independents first, then we want you to go to Labor, then to the Conservatives, which confusingly in Australia the Conservatives are called the Liberal Party. They are not a Liberal Party, that is a historical holdover name, but they're called the Liberals. So they might say, go to Independents, Independents and small parties first, Progressive Independents, small parties first, then Labor, then Liberal, then the right-wing party, the small right-wing parties. But within that, if there are, like last time, there were probably 15 candidates who were Progressive Independents or Progressive small parties. So that group, that smaller team, has to work out of those 15 who goes, who goes where. And there's a lot of horse trading, as I say, about that. Last election, for example, we had this team called the Climate Change Coalition, who were single-issue candidates wanting, action on climate change. Now we thought that sounds good. These people, sort of people we'd want to go to, and we'd expect them to come to us. But when we started talking to them, they started thinking that they could get a better deal from other people. And in some other states, they actually ended up preferencing these far right-wing groups, including groups that deny climate change even happening, because those groups said, we'll put you really high if you put us really high, and they decided that they thought they could win, and so they would do that. And now, so in some states they actually did us over like that. Now in my state, Victoria, they didn't, but we had a very, very long sleepless night where we were negotiating with them till late in the night, and we were calling, literally we were calling the husband of the woman who founded the party, because people had contacts with him, and saying, can you talk sense to your wife? Because she's going to go and send her preferences off to these far-right racist groups that don't even believe there is climate change. And eventually, whether it was him or whatever, sense was talked into them, and in both states they preferenced us pretty high, but we didn't know that wasn't locked in until 2 hours before. In fact, in one state it wasn't locked in until half an hour before the preferences had to be lodged. So yeah, it's a bad. The above the line system is a bad system. I mean, it's the core of our system, the fact that we use single transferable vote, proportional single transferable vote, that is great. It is the best system in the world. But you can take the best system in the world and you can corrupt it in various ways, and the above the line voting has corrupted it. And as I say, pretty much everyone agrees on that, but trying to work out, there's a lot of different options on how to change that.
Is it possible to see what the percentage of voters in each party who vote above the line or don't?
It varies a lot from state to state. In my state, Victoria, 97% of people overall vote above the line, which is appalling. I mean, it's just terrible. In Tasmania, for example, only 80% vote above the line, which is still higher than one would like, but big difference between 80 and 97. You turn around the other way, 3 and 20. Now, within within each stage, it's almost always the case that more Green voters vote below the line than any other party. Because basically, there was a very strong correlation between voting below the line and higher education. Almost nobody who doesn't have a university degree votes below the line. So Greens having the most educated voters, I mean, that's just an established fact that, you know, the two things in Australia anyway, and I imagine this is the case in both countries, but the two things in Australia that are most likely to make someone vote Green are one, being born after about 1965, and two, having a university degree. Consequently, Green voters much more likely to vote below the line than other parties.
And then, as you try and make deals with other parties, is it based at all on policy commitments for later? How do you enforce them?
It's a mixture. I mean, generally, it's partly based on, you know, historical record, what people have done, and for new parties on, you know, an impression of their policies and whether we trust them. It's partly based on straight out policy promises. But it used to be much more than that about policy promises. We used to often have a situation where we'd say, particularly to Labor, we will preference you if you promise to, you know, save this area of forest or do this or do that. But we've increasingly been moving away from that in recent years for a couple of reasons. One is that, it's so hard to actually ensure that they actually stick to that after the election. And the other thing is that because if we say to them, we'll preference you if you promise to do this, then that leaves them free to not preference us, and that's basically part of the reason that what happened in 2004 happened, was Labor was like, okay, if we give our preferences to family first, they'll preference us, and we don't have to preference the Greens because we can just promise the Greens that we'll, you know, save some forests and we'll sign Kyoto and whatever else, and the Greens will preference. And so that happened in 2004. And so in 2007, we were like, well, we're not very happy about you going and preferencing family first. So while there was a certain amount of negotiation about policies, mostly it was about, you know, we'll preference you if you preference us.
Isn't that interesting?
So why is the party growing in the number of elected seats? How many has it grown through the last several years?
Okay, around the country, state and federal politicians, state and federal members of parliament, we have about 2 years ago, we had I think about 12. We've now got 26 as of this morning. We just this morning, the count in one of our parliaments was finalised, and we had previously, before the election, we had one person in that parliament. On election night, it looked like we had 3, but late counting, we ended up getting 4. So that's taken us to 26.
And what state?
That's in the Australian Capital Territory, which is kind of the equivalent of Washington DC. It's, you know, it's based around the Parliament. It's small. It's not actually a full state, but it's got most of the powers of the state.
Out of how many seats?
That's out of there are 800 seats, state and federal seats across Australia. So 26 out of 800. So it's a fairly small proportion still. But in the case of the ACT, they've only got 17 seats. So we've now got 4 out of 17, which is the largest proportion we've ever had.
Now you do election analysis. Can you describe your position briefly, and then what kind of issues is the party winning on?
Right, okay. Well, my work tends to be, well, there's a few different roles. A lot of it is about looking at who votes for us. As I said, the two major factors we know are the education and the time, age at which they'll, when they were born. But looking at other factors, some of them are fairly obvious, like public transport usage and things like that. But we've, also, found some things that maybe would not necessarily be expected. And one factor we found that tends to correlate is not having mortgage. So if you are either you own your house outright or you're a renter, either of those you're more likely to vote Green than if you've got a mortgage. So things like that. So there's sort of that kind of analysis that I do. Then applying that to questions of where we can win. And then there are various ways in which this is used. One is in terms of allocating budgets, working out, so when we put the party's money allocated to seats, deciding which seats will get priority because we think there might be a chance of winning them. Now these days, because we've got more of a record, we can sort of, to a large extent, base it on on where we've got good votes in the past. But certainly in the earlier days, looking at the demographics was quite important.
What other criteria are you using to decide where to put resources?
Okay, well there's a few things. So where we can win, where we think there are real prospects for long-term growth. So either if we think that there's a candidate who is going to recruit a lot of new members and build the party there, even if we don't think they can win, we might resource them because of that. If it's a marginal seat, and so our preferences might influence the outcome, then we might put more money in so we can increase the chance of having that influence. If there's some reason why it's difficult for their local team to fundraise, because we expect them to fundraise part of the campaign and then there's some money centrally. Now some areas it's harder for them to fundraise than others, so we might compensate those areas by giving them more money. So all those those factors, and then there's some that's just sort of evenly, every area getting a certain base level of funding, and so there's a lot of sort of competing decisions about those factors. So that's part of my role with that. Now, basically the decision is made by the election campaign committee, and I've been on all the election campaign committees for the federal and state elections for Victoria since 1998. I've also been on some of the local government ones, but we've got local government elections coming up very soon, and I didn't go on the local government committee because I knew I'd be coming here and I'd be missing too crucial a part of it.
So that committee chooses the candidates for the party?
No, the candidates are chosen locally, and they're chosen by the area that they're running, and they're chosen by the membership usually. In some cases where it's a very low profile seat, the decision might be made by a selection committee, but usually it's a ballot of all the members. And certainly for the statewide, for the lead candidate for the Senate, which statewide, it's a postal ballot of all the members in the state. Now, the election campaign committee will do a few things like the lower candidates on the ticket. Because we have to select with the order of the ticket, we have to, with the above the line, we have to say which one of our candidates gets number one. But for some legal reasons, we actually have to run two candidates at least, and it's considered advantageous to run six. But only the first candidate's got any hope of winning. So the other five candidates, they will be selected by the election campaign committee rather than by the members, because they've got no chance of winning. So the members don't really care about who's second, who's third, and so the opinion is that it doesn't. You don't choose for the second person. You don't necessarily choose the second best candidate. because you want a candidate who will complement the lead candidate. So last time, when we actually selected the lead candidate, we had two people who got, were quite close in terms of the vote. But they were in a lot of ways quite similar. Like they were both male, they were both similar ages. One was a lawyer, one was a doctor. So quite similar in quite a few ways. So we're like, look, no point having those two, 1 and 2. Second guy's not going to get up anyway. So for the second candidate, we selected someone who balanced the lead candidate quite well because he was from the city, so we chose someone from a rural area. He was a man, we chose a woman. So and the other candidates likewise, we looked for people who made a more balanced ticket. So that was done by the campaign committee. Also, in some areas, we give all the areas a deadline, and we say if you haven't selected your candidate by this date, the election campaign committee will choose the candidate. And we hope that we don't have to do that. We'd much rather the locals choose them. And we send them lots of reminder notes to the people who haven't done it. But come the crunch, because we, for various reasons, we need to run in every single electorate. So you pass the deadline, still haven't selected someone, sometimes the campaign committee will step in.
If the party grows and it looks like you'll win more than one seat in these elections, do you have to change your bylaws, or?
No, well the bylaws are at the moment quite flexible, so that what it says is it describes how the lead position should be elected. Although not as much detail as it should, we need to tighten the bylaws, but basically that's there. At the moment it's actually sort of up in the air about how the lower positions are elected. So what happens to state council, last election state council said to the campaign committee, you do it. Now if the party grows, state council can just say, okay, this time we'll select the first two by popular ballot. And if we think there's, any chance that we'll get the second person up, I think State Council will make that decision.
Does the Green Party do better with Liberals or with Labour in government?
Very much with Labour in government. A big part of our recent surge, at least half, I'd say, of the reason for our recent increase is because we've got Labour in government federally now, and until recently we had them in every state. And what's happened is that because most of our voters are former Labour voters, they have seen Labour in government, they've been disappointed. Labour hasn't been nearly as good as they, in some cases Labour hasn't been as good as they expected. In some cases people didn't actually expect Labour to be any good, but they were just so desperate to get the Liberals out. And so they voted Labour, even though we have preferential voting. Most Australians don't understand the system very well, and we actually have not too bad a system. It could certainly be improved in a lot of ways, but the big problem is the lack of understanding. Basically because it's not taught in the schools. There is a program for schools that schools can run, which teaches it very well, but a tiny minority of schools have to pay for it. It's quite expensive. They have to bring in outside people to run it. It's quite expensive. Most schools don't run it. So most people never get taught about it at school, and then once you've left the schools, the opportunity to learn about it is much more limited. So there are a lot of people who think that they can't vote for a party that's not going to win. They don't understand that with preferential voting you can vote one for the party you really believe in and two for the better party who's got a chance of winning. So because of that, a lot of people who were voting Labour at the last election on the basis that they just had to get rid of our previous government, which our previous Prime Minister adored George Bush. His son came here to work on Bush's re-election campaign. So a lot of people, quite understandably, said we've got to get rid of him. And because they didn't really understand how the preferential voting worked, they voted for Labour. Now what's happened is some of those people have gone, well, we've got rid of him, the Liberals are in such a mess that they're not looking like that much danger of them getting back. And also some people have just been disappointed because Labor hasn't been as good as they expected, and so that's caused a surge in our vote. And although one of the things about a lot of Australians don't distinguish that much between state and federal elections, and so if they're unhappy with the state government, they take it out on the federal government and vice versa. So we've had 3 state elections, state and territory elections since the federal election, plus a lot of by-elections, and our vote has been up at all 3 of the state elections, very dramatically up, and also up at most of the by-elections. And that seems to be, to a large extent, about that change of government has really given us that boost.
How does your party finance itself?
Okay, with finances?
I was just going to ask the same question. How does your party fund it? I was literally going to ask that. It's so funny.
You get funding for each vote you get in federal elections, provided you get over 4%. Every vote you get gives you it's now up to $2.20. So you get, and that it's not like in Canada you don't get an annual figure. You just get, 3 weeks after the election they send you a check, $2.20 times. Yeah. Now, so that, since we've started getting more than 4%, and it's 4% in each seat, so if you're below 4% in one seat, you get nothing, but wherever you're above 4%, you get the money. So
is it just on a seat, or is it on a national or state-wide basis?
No, it's paid to the party nationally, but it's based on your vote in that seat. So if in one seat you get 4.01, you'll get a check for $6,000 or something like that. Well, actually, that's more than that. It's up to about $7,500.
You get a reimbursement on election expenses too?
Not federally. Federally, you just get the check. It's just like you spent this. So you've got this many votes. Deduct the votes in the seats where you didn't get 4%. Right, there's a check. Now, in state elections, some states you don't get any funding. In other states, you get a reimbursement on what you've spent up to a maximum of the amount, the number of votes times thing. So same system, except that you can only get as much as you've spent. So in 2002, for example, in Victoria, we did quite a bit better than we expected, and we were actually entitled to $700,000 if we'd spent that much, but we'd only actually spent $500,000, so we only got the check for $500,000, and $200,000 just disappeared into the ether. And as you can imagine, we weren't very happy about that. But the problem was that we'd been looking like we were going to get a lot less until really just before the election, and so we couldn't, by the time it was starting to become clear that we were going to get that much, we just didn't have time to spend it effectively. And of course there was the risk that if you spend too much and your vote isn't as good as it looks like, then suddenly you're out of pocket.
And 1 minute left. Is the party also funded through private?
Yes, so then there's donations, fundraisers, membership fees to join the party. All of those account for a significant portion. I think, roughly speaking, it's now about 60% from public funding and 40% from other sources, but I can't remember that. It's certainly changed a lot in different regions over the years.
Okay, let's see if we got those left.